When I began watching Golden Gate Girls and our decolonizing lecture, I was immediately shocked and delighted at how much the central figure of the documentary, Esther Eng, and I had in common. Not only were we both female filmmakers, we were also both lesbian and Chinese, even sharing the surname Eng. As I continued watching, I noticed more similarities. Although being ethnically Chinese, she grew up in the US at San Francisco's Chinatown, an important setting in my family history as it's the first place my Gongong stayed in America after sailing from China at the age of 12. Having never been to Hong Kong, visiting Chinatowns both in the UK and the US is often one of the only ways I can connect with my Chinese heritage. Correspondingly, Esther Eng had never been to China until she was 22, eventually establishing a successful career that spanned across Hong Kong, California, and New York. San Francisco's Chinatown was the first of its kind in America, dating all the way back to the 1850s. The Chinatown we know in Soho wasn't even the first of its kind in the city, with the first large Chinese hub being in Limehouse from the 1880s, a primarily male community of immigrant sailors. However, very few remnants remain of this history there, so I decided it wasn't worth the visit. London's current Chinatown is relatively new, emerging in the 1960s and only properly establishing itself in the 1980s. I decided to visit Chinatown, looking at it with fresh eyes and examining it as an Asian space in a Western country. I wanted to consider how growing up as an Asian individual with Chinatown as the only exposure to your own culture could impact your identity as an Asian American or Asian Brit, comparing my familiarity of London's Chinatown to the San Francisco one Esther Eng experienced. So I'm here in Soho at 7:06 on Thursday the 10th of April at the famous Chinatown, exploring how these microcosms of China might affect not only Westerners' views on East Asia, but also Chinese Americans or Chinese Brits growing up in the West. So this place has become quite the popular area to visit, as you can see. It's well known for its Asian cuisine, its colorful architecture, and its New Year's celebrations. Though it's easy to reduce these places to a tourist attraction, Chinatowns all essentially started as ghettos, just cheap places for Chinese immigrants to live in. And there are still real Chinese communities living here, just above the shops and restaurants. Many of these establishments are family businesses that have been running for decades, and the tourists coming here to visit this city inside of a city are often these families' only sources of income. You can find places that have more palatable Asian food like custard bao or boba tea, as well as places that are clearly catered towards Asian people, with whole ducks hanging in the windows. Right now I'm standing in front of one of the 4 gates that outline Chinatown. Tourists will see this and immediately recognize that it's Chinese from its bright hues of gold and red to its intricately designed dragons. However, when we compare it to a genuine paifang in China here, there's a clear disconnect. So why do Chinatowns across the world tend to have this kind of architecture, and why is it so different from the real thing? To understand this, we have to go back to San Francisco Chinatown. For a long time, the streets of Chinatown looked like any other neighborhood in San Francisco, but in 1906, a devastating earthquake hit that destroyed many buildings in the area. Coincidentally, in 1911, the Chinese Republican Revolution successfully overthrew its ancient imperial system. The combination of these two events is most likely what caused the shift from visual assimilation to architectural Chinese pride. Pagodas, paifangs, and red lanterns now fill the streets of both Chinatowns, London likely viewing San Francisco's success and following suit. The reason for these landmarks' inaccuracies is because they were all built by Western architects, interpreting East Asian aesthetics and recreating them with non-traditional materials. What emerges is a fantastical, orientalized rendition of China, often commercialized to bring eager sightseers in, wanting to get a taste of the Orient. I was fascinated to see just how prevalent this was when walking through Chinatown, from corporations' logos on the red lanterns to an oriental fashion store run by a South Asian man, with anime pins as well as sexualized versions of the cheongsams at the front of the store. So, what does this mean for Asian Americans and Brits? For Esther Eng, it's clear that being surrounded by Chinese culture, for example the Cantonese opera shows she loved so dearly, gave her a yearning for the China she'd never seen but knew she belonged to. When she finally travelled to Hong Kong in 1936 to promote her first film Heartaches, her and her work was extremely well received by the Chinese public, as not only was the film in Cantonese, but was filled with patriotic content. Esther continued to produce films in Hong Kong and California, always catering towards Chinese or Chinese American audiences. It seems that growing up where she did only strengthened her love for her heritage, regardless of Chinatown's faults. I would argue that the same could be said for most Asian American and Brits' feelings when going to a Chinatown. Nevertheless, it can be hard to shake the odd dichotomy between the sense of genuine community from your own people and outright fetishization from others, often encouraged by the locals, whether intentional or not. Truthfully, visiting Chinatown as an Asian San Franciscan may feel much less impactful compared to my experience in London, as the Chinese make up about 1/5 of the population in San Francisco, compared to London where they only make up about 1.7%. East Asian Americans are so common in California that they have their own cultural identity, relatively removed from the borders of specific ethnicity or the dark history between countries. The same cannot be said for England, where the South Asian community is much more dominant due to Britain's colonial history. Esther Eng and I may have a lot in common on the surface, but the differences in where we grew up likely gave us very distinct understandings of our Chinese identity, something that was largely as a result of our respective Chinatowns.